Good evening, everyone. System Chalk here with, I believe, the 15th episode of Book of Hours, our first YouTube series. Now, I've had a little bit of time between yesterday's episode and now in terms of recording, but I think we're okay. I actually took the time to reorganize a few different parts of the house, and what I didn't realize here was I was so busy looking at all the stuff in the servants' quarters north that I failed to realize there is a baronial book here. So that's going to be one for me to work on. We also have Don Lion coffee and, well, the severe chair is nice, but I was really hoping for the water here. That is a narrow window. All right. So lots of, still plenty of things to unpack here. So we've got our two items up here. We've got a book to catalog, and then I also want to try and find some kind of a home for the wood. And I don't think I'm allowed to put stuff on the ground. I guess I could put it on the ground in here? I know I can put the pets on the ground. Well, you know what? I don't normally like moving the skin shuck mead in this case because I always wind up missing it, but we'll make an exception here. Okay. Now, if memory serves, the gale was sort of the big event for today, and I think I was going to use that to read one of the more difficult sky texts. So we've got Traveling at Night, Ava's Treasury, and The Fallen Cross. Now, I'm not 100% sure on these texts here. If I read the description, so Seven Faces of Icarus, in the early 1530s, the last abbot of St. Brendan's, called Roaring Richard, set down his conversations with the illiterate local cunning man, Red William. We've got What Does Not Bark. Alexander Probst writes warily of Calyptra, a law, principle, or society which prevents the dissemination of dangerous knowledge. Now, for some reason, I get the impression that this might actually be one that gives me Storm, because I remember there was a book that talked about Calyptra that gave Storm. The drawback here is that, you know, any one of these could count as there's more than one Calyptra book. But I'm actually getting something of a strong impression that this may have like a Storm or a Solace. And then Locksmith's Dream, Stolen Reflections. To be honest here, this is a bit of a shot in the dark, but I pretty much always say, it's probably Revelation, something Lantern. There's only one of the 5 books that actually gives it, but for some reason I always associate it with Lantern. So we'll see. I mean, again, I don't want to rely on those, but I'm going to work with that hypothesis for the purposes of trying to read certain books. Now, for practical purposes, the only one that would be relevant would be, I suppose, if I had 2 Nectar. Any of the Storm stuff doesn't matter because we're already in a gale. We've already gone over the different locations in the house, so the Sky and the Heart aren't going to be relevant for these rooms. There is an argument to still bring in Mrs. Kill for the purposes of conversation. I did learn to my detriment that I can, in fact, open the smoking room, provided I'm not too eager to get rid of my health. But let's narrow down some of the possibilities here. So let's read Ava's Treasury. Ava de Wolf, last of the Brandkrugs, discusses the occult and aesthetic properties of jewels and other precious minerals. So we add the Gale, Frost, Furs and Feathers. We didn't even need to worry about the Astrolabe. I forgot about that. Well, with that in mind, does that mean... I think I went over this last time. Does this mean that there's something more special that I can do with Sky that I'm not considering? I don't think there's such a thing as a 7 Sky book to read. I don't think we have any Sky... Yeah, I'm pretty sure I already thought about this. So it's a little bit of a waste of a Gale, but this is the kind of game where you're allowed to relax. Okay, so that's Ava's treasury spoken for. Now, what would I want to do with the rest of the day? We've got 3 packages to open up. I am going to get Mrs. So let's maybe figure out what I would want to do with my elements of the soul. Actually, sorry, there is one other case. I think there was a grail kicking around here. Right, 9 grails. So let's think a little bit about that with Mrs. Kill. So we have the Arab for 2. Now, I don't believe we have something that can grant satisfaction, but let's imagine for a moment that we did. So in that case, we can bring her up to 6. And then I suppose the question would be where the 9 comes from. We have the... Oh, I know where it would come from. So we have the spice scales, but I think Domaine Reveline would give us... Yeah. I would prefer a Witching to Sane, if I'm completely honest. In fact, we might be able to get away with that just with a good old-fashioned Desires and Dissolutions and Arab on its own. Yeah. Okay. So I definitely have some ideas here in terms of how we're going to use Mrs. Kill. So there's two big ways that I can use her. One would be as a source of memories, and then number 2 would be as somebody who can craft a specific, or who can get us to a specific part of the house, which I wasn't expecting. So Mrs. Kill's mood always improves when I drop by. If you don't choose a topic, Mrs. Kill will offer help as a friend. As far as the remainder here, there may be something that changes when we read the text, but I don't see anything inside of these books that's going to change. These ones, I believe, were in the too difficult pile. Sorry, these ones I think were in the unreadable pile, and this is the too difficult pile. And I don't see anything about the day that's going to change these facts. So the rest of this is all going to be dedicated towards making things happen. So let's say that the Faust is already spoken for, so we will reserve Denzel, which in this case would be health or core. The Arab is going to be set aside just in case we need to use Mrs. Kill. So let's take care of the book first. We can consider that at a desk, so we'll use Trist for that. Catalog a baronial period book. This book was probably written around the time of Hush House's baronial period, roughly the 1500s to 1700s. If I examine it, I can learn more about what knowledge it might contain. And then the next step is going to be to open up the various packages. So I think we'll finally open up the bag of tricks. That was up here. And we'll use Fet for that. Something tricksy. Crack open the container, delight in your discovery. Have a conversation. Mrs. Kill has seen more of the world than she usually lets on. Conversations with her yield the occasional surprise. We won't use the Arab unless we get a satisfaction. All right, Deoris Volume 3. So that's going to be a bit easier than... Well, it's still a tricky one for us. I don't believe we have an edge... Yeah, I don't believe we have an edge skill yet, but if I were to get a... you know what, I think we actually need to wait for Hail here. Because I don't believe from conversation we can get a... I don't think in conversation we wind up getting a 2 edge. We still have other options if it comes down to it, but I'd rather just see how the day goes. So one thing that I have as an option here would be if we really run out of run out of books to read, or things to do with my elements of the soul, the reason why I wanted to have a shelf of plausible books would be I do have the option of taking a flyer on one of these, giving it a read, and hoping I get lucky with the art or the memories or something like that. It's a little early to be doing something like this, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. The biggest thing right now is, given the elements of the soul that I have, there's plenty to explore inside the house. And like I said, depending on the memories that I get, there is a situation in which I would use Mrs. Kill for an additional room, and there's a situation in which I would use Denzil to open up one of these rooms. I can also open up Crowcross Sands. I can do that just by hiring one of the fishermen, but I'm reluctant to do that simply because there are other things that I'm capable of doing, and I only have 1 shilling right now. So again, plenty of things to do with my elements of the soul, but I don't feel a particular need to rush one way or the other into a task. I already started moving some of the fancy drinks, so. Okay, Solace doesn't really do that much. I think we can already get an equivalent to that, but we'll still give it a shot. I won't completely empty out the infirmary, but I figured some of the things that I already have. All right, drinking cocoa. So that's another good one. Oh yeah, actually that I don't even need to really worry about preserving the Arab if I want, because the cocoa will also serve, and we've got 2 packages of it now. Okay, so we'll use the core to open up another package, the contraband jetsam, something renounced. Who threw this overboard? And so I think in this case the Arab's probably going to wind up being used to open up the investigator's suitcase, but as always we'll see what the day brings. Okay, Impulse is always interesting because that gives Nectar. So just as a reminder here, Deoris Volume 1 is a 1 Nectar text, so we combine that with Health, we get 2, we combine the Mortar and Pestle or the Cake Bowls, we get 3, and then essentially we're just waiting for one other nectar from a skill, or we take our chances and get art or something like that. It's a little late in the day for me to be trying something like that. When I say late in the day, it's because I've got this one would be used to read the text, so this would be the one that I could generate the memory from. And again, I'll leave myself the option, but I feel a little bit more committed to opening up the packages. Okay, so the regret is interesting. I suppose in a pinch here, because this has winter aspect, I can't really see this working with Denzil. I believe with Denzil it has to be sort of all hands on deck in terms of getting the forge up to where it needs to be. But with Mrs. Kill, I probably didn't do this. Well, I think I've only had 1 case where I let Mrs. Kill run aside recently, but because this has either 2 Moon or 2 Winter, I'd been thinking about using the Fisherman for this, or possibly Mr. Kill. But if we don't have anything else to do with Mrs. Kill, I can always use the Memory Regret here. She can open up Crowcross Sands. And it's not like, again, it's not like that's a major priority for me. In the end, it'll just be another thing that I can throw my tryst at. But as you can see, I've been using up my Elements of the Soul pretty handily so far. So I keep it as an option, but I don't want to go out of my way to get more stuff. The problems I'm running into are not really a function of not having enough stuff. It's more about having the right combination of skills and elements of the soul. So Mrs. Gill has seen more of the world than she usually lets on. Conversations with her yield the occasional surprise. Alright, a reminder of the book we were reading, Ava's Treasury. Ava DeWolf, Last of the Brandkrugs, discusses the occult and aesthetic properties of jewels and other precious minerals. Oh, I wonder if that's Anberine Lapidary that I get out of that. Black Nephrite and Scolecite for Nowhere, Orichalcic and Amber for Yeez, Amethyst and the Night Key of the Spider Door. For the Night Key of the Spider Door. Ava points out, bitterly, that there is no shortage of uplifting parables and proverbs about the saving graces of a flaw in a jewel, but that no one, not jeweler, nor priest, nor hour, has ever found a way to repair such a flaw. Okay, so that's the foresight I was looking for from Denzel, and that is indeed a skill that I can add in right away. So how would I indicate to myself that this is a foresight? I don't exactly want to have the books running all around the library. I think in this case here, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and put this on a shelf and hope for the best. But I think I'm at a point now. Let me just take a minute to think this through. So if I talk with Denzel, he has 2 forge. I talk with him about foresight, that's 4. I talk with him about the mortar and pestle, and yes, we have the rest of the day available to us. So may not be able to do anything with Mrs. Kill, but that's not a primary concern right now. Denzel will talk about practical matters, although he prefers to sit in silence. A shilling will buy his help for a day. If you give him occult coinage, he will perform the service of division instead. What do you need? Alright, so now we have a box of rarities alongside the luggage. We will consider amber and lapidary. Again, I'll probably wind up using the Arab with one of the containers, but we'll see. Use this lesson to acquire a new skill. Okay. I should be able to get quite a bit done today if I'm careful. Okay, that's another regret. There tis and be no tizzer. Mrs. Kill, as every local gossip knows, came from France to marry Mr. Kill, but there's scant trace of the continent in her accent now. Denzel the blacksmith will lend me his strength for the day, so we will give him the foresight. I can discuss a memory with my assistant. This will use up the memory, but boost the assistant's abilities for the rest of the day. We'll combine that with the mortar and pestle here. Brings him up to 5, and he can open the smoking room. Different from the reading room, but still gives me more shelf space. Another leaf on the Tree of Wisdom. So this is also rather good because of the forge that it gives me. So it's higher on Sky than I was looking for. But does this change anything? So let's say we have... Well, I guess we've got a reliable way of getting foresight. So that's 2, 3. Yeah, no, we're still quite short for the Journal of Walter de Wolf. But we can still... make a little progress when we get a lower level forge text. So this one is good for lightning is a little life and jewels are its eyes. Ava de Wolf, and we have the option of both Ithistry and Tauromachistry. So this one would get me another Fet. Black Sapphire, the bright arts speak of a shining city unbuilt. One day we might build it in the Mansus, the great house of dreams, with a foundation stone of black sapphire. This would be a great matter of Tauromachistry. Or Amber. The bright arts speak of a shining city unbuilt. One day we might build it like a jewel in the sea with a foundation stone of amber. This would be a great work of Ithistry. Both of these are elements of the soul that I already have. So, as always, I reserve the option of putting these into the Tree of Wisdoms. The reason why I've been holding off is you notice every once in a while I'll get a new skill and then I'll say, oh, we've already got something committed here. So my worry, of course, would be if I wound up getting a Faust and I used that to commit something that would, you know, if it takes up a space that would have gotten me, say, a metal or a shaft, then I won't necessarily feel bad about it in the moment because I probably won't recognize that I cut myself off from that possibility. But I haven't felt too much of a need to get certain things done. Obviously, I could be doing more with more elements of the soul. I could, you know, be working at the Sweet Bones more often, earn some money or something like that. But overall, we haven't really been that limited in terms of the elements of the soul that we could access. Even here with that metal that I didn't take because of its association with the mare and the tree, ultimately we've gotten the assistance from Denzil that we would have gotten at that point anyway. We would have only been able to get it once because of the money anyway. So it's why I sometimes wish people would relax a little bit in terms of, you know, telling people the best way to do things, because there's lots of different paths to the same place, and even the game's loading screens tell you to just, you know, take your time and enjoy it. Like, the only time I really feel that you need to rush for anything in this game is Numa, and that's just because the persistent memories go away. But even then, you know, it's a question in terms of what you're trying to accomplish in Numa. If you've got, you know, some high-level skills that you want to level up, yeah, you definitely need to throw everything you can into solving that. But other than that, you know, there's very few things in this game that will kind of... It's not like you get shut out of something forever if you don't run it. And, you know, you don't get old in this game. There's no rent to pay, so... And the reason I like that atmosphere a bit more is that I sometimes get the impression that... So I think actually also Cultist Simulator is built in such a way that you will sometimes get distracted and forget things. So, you know, the idea of forgetting to feed yourself, you know, when you're really into a particular kind of work. This is a thing that happens to people. And in some ways, I don't exactly want to say it's good, but you can see why that is maybe a not so good aspect of an otherwise very positive thing. I think a lot of us probably would wish for that kind of passion on a given subject, or that kind of focus. And it's a double-edged sword in the case of Cultist Simulator, because in the case of Cultist Simulator, there are people who don't notice the pause button right away. And when they do, that helps. And then there are some cases where, you know, you forget to look at something at the moment and you wind up missing out on something. I believe the pause button was actually a conscious choice. I seem to remember comments to that effect, that the not exactly hiding but not making the pause button obvious was an intentional choice on the part of Cultist Simulator. And if you think about things like the investigator, like the detective legacy in that one, I think if you step outside maybe your own individual experience of that legacy and instead just sort of think about how someone who hasn't played the game 50 times before or something would engage with a detective the first time, I think it's very reasonable to assume that at some point they'll slip up and they won't commit that reason to, you know, to not open up the folder. You have to really focus to make sure that that doesn't happen. And when there's a lot of different things going on in the game, it's quite reasonable to think that that's not the sort of thing that you can expect someone to do. So in the case of Book of Hours, again, it's one of these differences here where instead of making the contrast as being, you know, here are the bad things about Cultist Simulator and here are the good things about Book of Hours, I like to sort of highlight that in this case the pace and the tone allow people to engage more deeply with the material, whereas Cultist Simulator will make you feel sort of chased to do certain things. And that doesn't mean that you can't engage with the story and the lore more deeply, but that's normally going to be happening over multiple playthroughs as you read the book, you know, having started and failed. I'd actually argue that if you get too good at Cultist Simulator early on, you may miss out more on some of the details just simply because you don't get to read the books as often as you would. You only get to read a book once in any given playthrough. Actually, that's not true. There are a couple of duplicated books, but in general, you only have the opportunity to read those books once per playthrough. So, and in the case of Book of Hours, you can read a book as many times as you want, although I'm very interested in the number of people who don't realize that you can reread books for a certain memory. And I suppose, you know, it makes sense in its own sort of way, but I find it very interesting that people are willing to consider items in the house for memories, but they don't consider considering the books again. And I kind of want to know the psychology behind that. Anyways, the smoking room. A tarnished brass sign on the door clearly reads smoking room. Rags of very old smoke sway restlessly, hazing the room beyond. What remains of the protections Van Loren once placed on it, and yet still no sign of a fire. We can also talk with Mrs. Kill. If we're lucky, we will get a satisfaction from her, and if we're not lucky, then we just open up the box of rarities. I suppose one way or the other I should be talking with her about the regret, but again, it depends on what the memory is. Okay, storm memory is nice, but I think I will... Well, it's 30 seconds, so we'll do one more. I actually suspect at this point, even if I wanted to, I couldn't get her up to the 9 rail. Yeah, so actually with that in mind, let's open up a box with our Arab. Crack open the container, delight in your discovery. Alright, lots of books. And the web-snared room is 6 heart, 6 rose, or 6 sky. So if we, if we had a situation like today with the gale, that would be quite straightforward. I think with Mrs. Kill, so we've got the 2 from the core, 2 from... Okay, we can actually open this whenever we want. And that's because of the music. That's a trap. Alright, so... I am going to talk with her about regret. Exalt with a memory, I can discuss a memory with my assistant. So here's the description of the Westcott room. By God, sir, we shall have no cigars in the library, and we shall have no house without a smoking room. Dr. Ambrose Westcott, 1734 to 1797. The Curia period. In the 18th century, a secretive cabal of scholars established the Curia of the Isle to manage Hush House, making it a haven of knowledge until 1896, when a disgraced librarian brought the house to penury. So we've got Ambrose's desk, we've got a bust of Ambrose Westcott himself, cast in brass. We've got Philemon. Ambrose Westcott liked to name his hunting trophies after former rivals whom, he said, his trophies resembled, Tavish and Finian. Painting of the Mansus. There have been many attempts to depict the House of the Sun. This, by the visionary painter known only as the Magyar, is the best known. It's signed and dated. If it really is the original, it must count as one of the great treasures of the house. And again, plenty of books, plenty of other details to work with, but let's start by opening up the tidal flats. Brandkrug is a tidal island. At low tide, you could walk there, though you probably shouldn't. Flushed Mommet, a crimson-stained little cloth doll with merry button eyes and a frill of twitching ribbons. Now, I am curious what that looks like compared to the Pale Mommet. The Pale Mommet's 2 heart, 2 moth, 4 grail, and the Flushed Mommet is 3 moth, 3 heart, and 6 grail. And I do believe I know the rest. Well, I think I have a rough idea about the recipe that you need to work with this. I believe there is a recipe that specifically says if you would like to give a Mommet a little bit more life, do this thing with it. I suspect we won't make too much progress in the next day, but let's see what spring brings other than some money from St. Ronwin's. I'm pretty happy with where we wound up on this session, actually. Numa! Alright. That wound up That wound up being a rather good bit of timing. I'm short on... I will confess, I'm actually short on a few things here. I think, excuse me, it would probably be very unwise for me to try and read a book during Numa, despite what the season gives me. And I don't have the traditional harvesting abilities, so I don't have anything with... I don't really have anything with nectar to be able to harvest. So I'm probably going to need to think... I need to think a little bit about how I handle this Numa, because in one sense I do have access to a bronze Spintria, and yet I kind of know what I would have to do to get it, and that may not be wise. I don't know. I think there's a few options that I have here, but it's going to be... I think it's going to be a little hit or miss for tomorrow, but I'm very glad that I'm going to have some time to think about this. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. We should have one more video for this week, but that will involve a lot of thinking on my part to just basically try and figure out what the best options for my elements of the soul are today. Anyways, take care. We'll see you in the next one.